He stopped his horse because a room was humming. I didn't see him right off, just caught the glint of morning on a window pane and kept working the dough. The cookhouse was small, low-roofed, and never meant for notice. Smoke hung flat near the rafters, my hands moved by habit, dusting flour, folding quiet into every crease. That hum wasn't meant for anyone but the fire. Most mornings start before sense does. You get the water hot, you lay out the pans, you watch the light crawl across the boards. I'd been at the ranch near 3 years, and still no one could recall my first name without squinting. That suited me fine. You last longer when you blend with the stove. The song slipped out before I knew it, half remembered, something my mother used to hum when she kneaded dough the same way. It wasn't much, just a few notes that rode the heat. Then came the small silence that told me someone had stopped outside. A horse shifted. Leather creaked. I could feel eyes through the warped glass. I didn't turn. The bread still needed shaping, and pride won't let a body fumble in front of strangers. When I finally looked up, he was already turning his mount, one of the Bennett heirs by the way he sat the saddle, too clean for fence work, too tired for vanity. I thought no more of it till afternoon, when I opened the back door to shake out the flour sack. There on the step lay a scrap of parchment, folded neat, edges dust-coated, except for a single hoof print pressed dark across the corner. No name, just 4 words written steady. You make the morning better. I read it once, quick, then twice, slower. The letters leaned like they'd been written against a saddle horn. It felt foolish standing there with the wind tugging at my apron, the fire popping behind me. Nobody leaves a note for the cook, not unless it's an order. Still, my hands wouldn't drop it. I looked around, the yard empty, the hills bright with dust. My pulse ticked louder than the flies. I folded the scrap again and tucked it inside my recipe book, between the pages for sour biscuits. The ink left a faint print on the next sheet, like a secret insisting on echo. After that, I worked quieter. The boys who fetched wood must have thought I'd gone hoarse. I only sang when the room was empty, soft enough the fire was the only one listening. But each dawn I'd glance at the step before opening the door, half dreading, half hoping. It's a strange thing being noticed once after years of invisibility. The eyes in the window might have been a mistake, or mercy, or just curiosity from a bored air. Yet the day stretched different after it. The dough rose higher, the shadows softened around the stove, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the room itself was waiting for another scrap to land.
He left flowers and fixed things, but the rumor mill found the rest. The first daisy showed up 3 mornings after that note, bright as fresh butter against the gray steppe. Looked like it came from higher up the ridge. Those mountain daisies don't grow near the corrals. I set it in a chipped teacup beside the stove, told myself it was only wind that carried it down. But wind doesn't stack wood. Next day, a neat pile waited by the door, split fine, dry at the heart like it'd been seasoned months. The hinge on the pantry door stopped squealing that same night. No one claimed credit. When I asked around, the ranch hands just grinned the way men do when they've decided something ain't their business, but they'll enjoy watching it anyway. Before long, talk started. Quiet at first, someone calling me sweetheart in passing, someone else asking who I was keeping company with after hours. Ranch talks like prairie fire, starts with one spark and runs till it hits fence. I could feel eyes now wherever I went, to the well, the smokehouse, even into town for salt. The Bennett heir, Thomas, I learned, kept his distance, just a nod from horseback or a polite tip of his hat if others were near. But those small courtesies only fanned the flames of gossip hotter. At supper, the other women took to whispering. One said I'd gone and set my cap for a man I'd never dined with. Another guessed it was all a bet among the Bennetts to see how easy the cook might blush. I kept my eyes on the stew and stirred till the bottom nearly scorched. Truth was, I didn't know what it meant. Each small kindness felt like a hand reaching through the smoke, then pulling back before I could tell if it meant to lift me or test me. The daisy wilted slow, leaning toward the warmth. I left it there till its color went the shade of tea leaves, then pressed it flat in the back of my recipe book, beside a folded note. After that, I sang less. The boys noticed, said breakfast tasted quieter. I smiled like that was a compliment, and busied myself with pots. But when the wind came down the hill at dusk, I'd sometimes hum just enough for the air to catch it, wondering if he'd still pause, listening. One evening, I came out to dump wash water and caught sight of a figure at the far corral, not moving, just watching the cookhouse glow. He raised a hand once, slow, then turned toward the ridge. That night, I couldn't sleep for wondering what it cost to be seen by someone who never speaks your name. By morning, another daisy waited. No note this time. Just the flower, dew still clinging, and a hoof print beside it that looked almost deliberate. I picked it up, turned it between my fingers, and realized how far the quiet had carried us. It wasn't just the daisy that needed hiding now, it was the ache that came with it. So I shut the door, pulled the curtain, and sang only when I was sure nobody at all could hear.
He handed her blank pages and something like permission. The morning he asked me to ride, I almost said no. Cooks don't leave the kitchen mid-prep, not unless the roof's burning. But he came to the door with a look that made refusal feel like arrogance. Said he wanted to show me where the creek began. Said the bread could wait. I told him it couldn't. He said he'd take the blame. So I tied a kerchief over my hair, wiped the flour from my hands, and climbed up behind him. The saddle was too clean, the leather smelling new, but the horse breathed steady. We rode out past the fence line where the air lost its smoke and the valley spread like an open palm. He didn't talk much. The wind and hooves took care of that. Every now and then he'd point out something I'd never seen, how the river curved around the cottonwoods, how the ranch roofs caught light like scales. It looked different from up there, quieter. When we stopped on a rise, he swung down and pulled something from his prot, a small weathered journal tied with a thin strap of rawhide. He turned it over in his hands before offering it. "I thought you might have words you don't say out loud," he said. "You ought to keep 'em." I laughed soft, the kind that comes from disbelief. "I don't write," I told him. "Maybe not yet." He set it beside me on the saddle horn, the pages blank but sun-warmed. For a moment, I didn't move. I just looked at it. Something so simple, and yet heavy in ways I couldn't name.
Nobody had ever given me a thing that didn't have a job tied to it. He looked off toward the horizon like the gesture meant nothing, but his throat worked when he swallowed. There were freckles at his collarbone, sweat darkening the edge of his shirt. I remember thinking how strange it was, seeing a man bred for ledgers and inheritance standing there unsure of his own voice. I took the journal, more to end the moment than to claim it, but the weight of it in my lap made my chest tighten. We didn't speak much on the way back. The world had shifted between us, quiet but final. He helped me down at the cookhouse and touched his hat as if to say that nothing improper had happened, though we both knew something had. That night, I opened the book under lamplight. The pages smelled faintly of pine. I wrote one line in the middle of a page and shut it quick before I could see how clumsy it looked. It's a strange thing to be seen. I hid the journal beside my recipe book, under the folded note and the pressed daisy, 3 small relics of a story I wasn't sure I wanted told. Still, I found myself glancing toward the ridge at dusk, wondering if he was somewhere writing too, or if the silence between us was the only language either of us trusted.
A speech in the square nearly sent her walking away forever. The festival came with the dust of summer, flags strung between posts, fiddles sawing, pie stands sweating under canvas. The Bennett Ranch sent wagons of food, so I went early to help set tables and mind the ovens near the livery. It was supposed to be a day of laughter, but laughter in towns like ours always had a hierarchy. By noon, the air stank of molasses and pride. Folks from every spread came down, the ladies in silk, the men with polish on their boots. I kept to the back, sleeves rolled, ladle and stewed anyone who held a bowl. Then she came, Miss Eleanor Voss, cousin to the Bennetts, visiting from back east. She looked like she'd been dipped in cream and carried in a glass case. Her words were sugar, her eyes the color of judgment. She called for a song, said every festival needed music from the people who keep us fed. I knew what she meant. The crowd turned my way. Someone laughed. I felt the heat crawl up my neck. I tried to decline, but she pressed, all charm and poison. She said, "Come now, Miss Cook, you've got quite the admirer in this town, I hear. Let's all enjoy what he hears at dawn." The words hit like a slap. A few men snickered, boots shifting in the dirt. I saw Thomas across the crowd, still, jaw set, eyes hard. He didn't move, not yet. I could have sung, pretended it didn't sting, but my throat closed like the air had turned to ash. I set my ladle down and stepped back from the table, apron twisted in my hands. The whispering swelled like cicadas. Eleanor smiled wide, satisfied. She said, "Perhaps the tune only works in private." That laughter, that fin-cutting kind, was worse than any insult. I turned away before the tears could show, walking past the booths, past the bandstand, past every painted smile. The ground tilted under my feet, and I knew if I stayed another hour, I'd break apart right there in front of 'em all. I made it as far as the hitch rail before the shame caught up to breathe. Every kindness, every note, every daisy suddenly felt like a target pinned to my back. I thought about the journal, the line I'd written, and how foolish it sounded now. Seen? No, just spotted. By the time the sky started to pink, I'd already decided.
I'd pack before dawn, slip away down river where no one knew my name. The cookhouse could find another pair of hands. The ranch wouldn't mourn a ghost. But just as I reached for the reins of a spare wagon mule, I heard hoofs fast behind me. One rider, furious enough to make the dust lift in sheets. And that's when I realized the festival wasn't done with me yet.
He rode into the square and told them she deserved better. The noise reached before he did. Iron shoes striking hard pan, cutting through music and chatter like a blade through cloth. Folks turned first toward the sound, then toward me. I froze by the hitch rail, mule rope in hand, dust curling at my boots. Thomas Bennett rode straight into the heart of the square, hat low, coat still dusty from the trail. He didn't slow till he was near the tables where Ms. Voss still stood smiling, holding court like nothing had happened. He swung down fast enough to startle her. "You think that was kind?" he asked, voice clear as church bell, "or just cruel in better clothes?" The square went quiet. Even the fiddles quit. You could hear the creak of his saddle as it settled. Ms. Voss blinked, tried to laugh, but he stepped closer. "That woman you mocks fed every man here. You eat her bread and call it hospitality, then shame her for singing while she works. That's what passes for manners now?" A few heads dropped. Some turned away, pretending to study their boots. I couldn't breathe. My pulse hammered in my throat like the sound of a second rider who'd never come. "She's no show pony," he said, calmer now. "She's part of this place, and she's earned her piece." Ms. Voss flushed a color I didn't know how to name. She tried to answer, something about misunderstanding, but he didn't give her room. "Then understand this," he said, voice low but carrying. "Her name's Mary. Use it with respect." The sound of my name on his tongue was like being struck and blessed all at once. Then he turned, just once, met my eyes across the crowd. That look wasn't pity. It wasn't courtship either. It was steadiness. A man trying to right what he'd allowed to go wrong. He put his hat back on, mounted again, and left without another word. Dust swallowed him before anyone dared move. The silence broke in small cracks. Someone coughing, someone starting to pack up. I could feel the air bending different, like a door opened inside every stair. Eleanor Voss left town by morning stage, citing poor local manners. As for me, I didn't leave. The thought of running turned sour. I walked back to the cookhouse, still trembling, and found the old daisy pressed flat in my book. I set it on the sill, brittle and brown, but standing. That night, I sang again. Soft, nothing fancy, just the tune that started all this. Only this time, I didn't close the window. Let the sound go where it would. Maybe it reached him, maybe it didn't. But it reached me, and that was enough to stay.
Smoke swallowed the room. He broke the door and carried her out. It started with a careless coal. The wind had been prowling all night, whining through the gaps in the shutters. I was up before dawn, working dough again, always dough, and didn't notice when a spark jumped from the stove onto a scrap of cloth by the wall. By the time the smell hit me, the corner was breathing smoke. I threw a bucket, but it only hissed, spreading gray across the rafters. The fire licked fast, hungry for air. I ran to the door, stuck. Heat warped the latch. The windows were too small.
the air thick enough to taste metal. I dropped low, tried to crawl, but the smoke rolled heavier, pressing me flat. Every breath felt like swallowing gravel. The room blurred. Somewhere beyond the wall, a horse screamed. Then a crash, splinters, a voice shouting my name like a curse. The next thing I knew, light poured in. Orange behind him, white around his shoulders. Thomas broke through with his arm over his face, coat flung wide. He didn't hesitate, just crossed the burning floor and hauled me up. I remember the sound of his coat catching, the smell of singed wool, and his grip like iron around my ribs. We went through the doorway half blind, stumbling into the cold. The night air hit like a slap, full of ash and stars. He laid me on the dirt and ripped the coat off, beating out the small fires still clinging to it. I tried to sit up, coughed till I saw spots. I said, "The stove," thinking of the bread, the room, the notebooks. He said, "Let it burn." And I did. The whole cookhouse roared, a sound like memory being erased plank by plank. Men from the bunkhouse came running with buckets, shouting orders that didn't matter. He stayed beside me, one hand on my shoulder, saying little. His face was streaked black, eyes red at the edges, coat half ruined. I could see the burn on his forearm where he'd covered me. When the fire finally sank to coals, dawn had already come. Smoke drifted pale over the wreckage, curling like exhausted breath. Someone brought coffee. Someone else brought blankets. I couldn't taste or feel much, just watched the light crawl over what used to be my world. Thomas didn't leave my side. Every time I opened my eyes, he was there, as still as a fence post, hat in his hands, the way men look when they've seen too much and don't know what to say about it. By morning, the only thing left standing was the stone hearth. I asked if they'd rebuild. He said yes, but the way he said it, soft, certain, sounded less like a plan and more like a promise.
They rebuilt the room and hung a sign that changed everything. The cookhouse smelled of wet ash for weeks. I couldn't step near it without feeling the heat crawl back over my skin. Thomas kept the hands busy clearing debris, but no one said much around me. Pity hangs heavier than smoke. Then, one morning, I woke to the sound of hammers. Through the kitchen window of the main house, I saw carpenters setting new beams, fresh pine pale against the blackened ground. A wagon load of lumber stood ready, and someone had chalked a square on the dirt where the old door used to be. "They're rebuilding," one of the ranch girls whispered. "For you." I didn't believe it until I saw Thomas pacing with a blueprint, sleeves rolled, face serious as payroll. He caught sight of me and nodded once, nothing grand, just a look that said, "You're not gone yet." I went back to the boarding room and cried till the coffee went cold. They worked fast. In less than 2 weeks, the new cookhouse stood solid, roof shining like oilcloth. The hearthstones were reset, the oven rebuilt deeper than before. When they called me down to see it, I stood in the doorway and smelled cedar and lime, clean beginnings. Above the lintel, carved into a plank of oak, was a single word: Mary's. I nearly turned away. The crowd of ranch hands and townsfolk waited, hats in hand, faces unsure whether to smile or hold solemn. Thomas stayed a step behind, watching but not directing. This was mine to answer. I ran my palm over the carved letters, rough-edged and new. It wasn't vanity I felt, it was fear. To name something after me meant I couldn't disappear again. I'd have to belong, to be seen daily in the doing. So I stepped inside, lit the first fire, mixed the first dough, and when the bread came out, I passed pieces to every man who'd hammered a nail, every woman who'd hauled water, till we were all dusted in flour and laughter again. That night I sang, not for show, not for thanks, just because the walls were fresh and the room needed filling. Folks drifted in from the yard, listening quiet. No one mocked, no one whispered. The next morning, a newspaper man from town came by, said he wanted to write about the cook who rose from her own ashes. I told him to keep it short and spell the name right. By week's end, Mary's Cookhouse was a stopping point for riders and drifters alike. Travelers said the bread was worth the detour. I kept my head down and worked, same as before, but something inside me had steadied. The journal stayed under the counter, pages filling slow, line by line, with the kind of words I used to swallow.
A letter asks if singing matters. She answers from the stove. By spring, the cookhouse sounded like it had always been there. Voices, clatter, the steady hum of pans. Riders came through for breakfast even when they didn't need supplies, just to stand near the warmth. The news sign above the door had lost its shine, darkened by weather, and that suited me fine. Some afternoons I'd rest at the back table, writing in the journal till the pages leaned full. I never aimed to make sense of everything that happened. Fire, shame, rescue. But somehow the writing baked it all into something that held shape. Then, one rainy evening, a boy brought a letter sealed in blue wax. Said it was from a girl downriver who'd read about Mary's Cookhouse in the newspaper. Her handwriting shy and small. She said she liked to sing while milking and wanted to know if a voice like hers could ever matter anywhere beyond her barn. I sat with that a long while. The rain ticked against the window. The stove breathed low. I could almost see her, mud on her hem, song caught halfway between breath and doubt. So I took out my pen, the same one Thomas had given with the journal months before, and wrote back. Your voice matters the moment it leaves you. Don't wait for permission. Sing while you work, sing while they laugh. Sing till the quiet answers you back. The world won't always listen kindly, but sing anyway. I folded the page, sealed it, and tucked a small pressed daisy inside before handing it to the rider bound downriver. When the door shut behind him, I stood alone in the glow of the stove, hearing the rain ease into steady rhythm. Somewhere out there, maybe in a barn that leaked like this roof used to, another girl would hum her own tune and not hide it. That was enough legacy for me. When closing time came, I swept the floor, stacked the pans, and lingered by the hearth. The flames moved like pages turning, the light catching on the old hoofprint scrap still pinned above the door, faded now, but not forgotten. I sang then, low and clear, same melody that started it all. The air carried it out through the open window, across the yard, maybe farther. And if anyone heard, I hope they knew it wasn't for them. It was for the woman I used to be, the one who sang to the fire and never thought anyone would stop to listen.